Hello everyone, my name is Harold and I am a CFII, and today I'll be going over with you guys some important items from the FAR aim. So we'll start off with the FAA. The FAA is a government agency within the Department of Transportation. They're responsible for regulating all aspects of civil aviation within the United States. Some of their responsibilities include regulating civil aviation and commercial space transportation. They maintain and operate air traffic control and navigation systems for both civil and military aircrafts. And they develop and administer programs relating to aviation safety and the National Airspace System. So the FAR aim looks like this, and it is rules and regulations regarding aviation, and they are part of the Code of Federal Regulations, and it is Title 14, which relates to aeronautics and space. And Title 14 is one of 50 titles comprising of the United States Code of Federal Regulations, and it is issued by the FAA and the Department of Transportation. The FAR aim also consists of Title 49, Code of Federal Regulations. This one regards transportation, and it's a principal set of rules and regulations regarding transportation and transportation-related security. And the combination of part of Title 14 and 49 Code of Federal Regulations is what makes up the Federal Aviation Regulations, also known as the FAR. The CFRs are organized into groups called parts, and each part refers to a specific type of activity. And they are usually on the front in the title of contents. If you flip through it, they have title of contents like this, and I have it here on the slide as well. And if we just go through it quickly, part 1 has all the definitions and abbreviations that are used in the FAR aim. Part 43 is regarding maintenance, rebuilding, and alterations. Part 48, registration and marking requirements. Now, the more important ones, Part 61 is certification requirements for both pilots and instructors. Part 67 is medical standards and medical certificates. We'll go ahead and go to Part 91. These are general operating and flight rules, and we're going to be looking at mostly those. And then the last one near the end, they have the 49 CFR, which is NTSB 830, accident reporting. Now, the FAR aim consists of two parts. The first part we went over is the FAR. Those are the regulations. Now, the second half is called the AIM, also known as the Aeronautical Information Manual, and it's basically the official guide to basic flight information and air traffic control procedures. It contains a variety of topics that are of interest to pilots, and if you're unsure of certain procedures or anything related to aviation in general, the AIM is a good source of official information. Some of these include health and medical facts related to aviation, factors affecting safety of flight, some of the terms used in the ATC system, safety, accident, and hazard reporting, and these are the 10 chapters that are in the AIM. So first we'll go over Part 61 of the FAR, and Part 61 is basically the requirements for issuing pilot, instructor, and ratings, and the conditions of when the certificate and ratings are needed, and privileges and limitations of these certificates and ratings. So the one that applies to us will be the student pilot certificate and the private pilot certificate. Part 61 also goes over medical certificates that are needed. It lists which medical certificates are required for certain types of activities and the duration of medical certificates. This is under Part 61.23. And this is a small table kind of breaking down the different class of medicals and their expiration dates. And as you can see over here, if you're under the age of 40, and you have a first class medical, your first class medical expires after 12 months. And if you're 40 and over, your first class medical only is valid for 6 months. Once your first class medical expires, it is still considered a first class medical, but you will only have third class medical privileges for the remainder of the 60 or 24th month, depending on your age. The second class medical is 12 months after the date of examination, regardless of age. And after your second class medical, after 12 months, you will still have a second class medical, but you only have third class medical privileges for the remainder of the 60 or 24 months. And your third class medical, which is the more basic one, they usually typically last for 60 months after the date of examination if you are under 40. If you are over 40, they are good for 24 months after your date of examination. And then we'll be going over student pilot certificates. This is part 61.81. And it goes over the eligibility requirements. So you must be at least 16 years old to be a student pilot, and you must be able to speak, read, and write the English language. And before you solo, the student needs to have taken the aeronautical test that addresses item in part 61.81 Bravo 1, and they must have done the pre-solo flight training on the items listed on 61.87 Delta. And after they have those training and they have taken the test successfully, they must have the proper endorsements for solo flight from their instructor. For solo cross-country, they must have received ground and flight training on cross-country maneuvers and procedures listed in Part 61.93 Echo, and they also must have proper endorsements for solo cross-country. Now for a private pilot, this one's under Part 61.102. Eligibility requirements, they must be at least 17 years old, and they must be able to read, speak, write, and understand the English language, and they must hold a U.S. student pilot certificate. They must pass the knowledge test on aeronautical areas, and they must pass the required practical test on areas of operations, and they must have met the aeronautical experience requirements in 61.109. Prior to actually taking the practical test, the examiner is going to check and ensure that they have received logbook endorsements certifying that the instructor conducted and reviewed training on applicant study on the knowledge areas, that the student is prepared for the knowledge test, and they have conducted training in areas of operations listed in 61.107, and that the instructor certifies that the applicant is prepared for the practical test. So the aeronautical experience, 61.109, for Part 61 student, the applicant needs at least 40 hours of total flight time, minimum. They need at least 20 hours of flight training with an authorized instructor, 3 hours of solo cross-country flight training, 10 hours of solo flight training that includes 5 hours of solo cross-country. They need to have one solo cross-country with a total distance of 150 nautical miles, full stop landing at 3 points, and one straight line distance of more than 50 nautical miles. They also need 3 hours of night flight training that includes one cross-country at night over 100 nautical miles total distance, and they need to do 10 takeoff and landings to a full stop at night. They also need to do 3 hours of hood time, what's called hood time, which is essentially simulated instrument conditions. So 3 hours of flight training with sole reference to the instruments. And then proceeding 2 months prior to a check ride or a practical test, the student has to have had at least 3 hours of flight training with an authorized instructor. So once you get your private pilot license, there are some privileges and limitations as pilot in command. So as a private pilot, you could act as pilot in command, carrying passengers. However, you are not allowed to act as pilot in command when you're carrying passengers or property for compensation or hire. So to keep it simple, if you're getting paid, if you're a private pilot, you can't get paid to carry people or property. And if you're doing a flight for fun with, your friends, you cannot pay less than the pro rata share of operating expenses of a flight. So if you go out and rent a plane with a friend and you are going to the PIC, you could be the PIC. However, he can't pay for the entire flight. Like, you have to pay your pro rata share. Some of these expenses can include fuel, oil, airport expenditures, and rental fees. There are some exceptions to this rule. You could act as PIC carrying passengers as long as it's incidental to the business or employment, meaning you're not getting directly compensated for, carrying passengers or property. It's just something you're doing for your job. If you're flying as PIC for a charitable or nonprofit or community event, and you're allowed to be PIC for search and rescue operations. However, you can only be reimbursed for operating expenses. If you're an aircraft salesman, you could act as PIC to demonstrate an aircraft that you're trying to sell to a prospective buyer. However, for this exception, you must have at least 200 hours of logged flight experience. You could get paid to do glider towing, but you must meet the requirements of 61.69. And we're going to move on to currency. So currency is under Part 61.56 and Part 61.57, and it is essentially the FAA's minimum requirements to legally act as PIC or carry passengers. So the first one is a flight review, Part 61.56, and this states that a flight review will consist of minimum of 1 hour flight training and 1 hour ground training, and that is minimum. This is up to the instructor or whoever is conducting the flight review. If they feel like you need more than 1 hour, the instructor will let you know, and that's what you'll have to do. But at a minimum, you have to have 1 hour of flight training and 1 hour ground training. If you have not done a PIC within the last 24 calendar months, if you have not done a flight review within the last 24 calendar months, you cannot act as PIC. And a pilot proficiency check or a practical test conducted by examiner, such as a check ride, counts as a flight review. Now, recency is under Part 61.57, and this one is more of being able to carry passengers and act as PIC. So this one states you cannot act as PIC when carrying passengers unless if during the day within the preceding 90 days, a pilot has performed 3 takeoffs and landings. And at night within the preceding 90 days, the pilot has performed 3 takeoffs and landings to a full start. So there's a huge difference between currency and proficiency. They are not the same thing. So currency is meeting the FAA's set minimum requirements to be legal to fly or to be legal to carry passengers, whereas proficiency has more to do with being able to fly competently and proficiently, safely. Just because you're current does not mean you're a proficient.